speaking of moments, you know, you've been, as you mentioned, your career with the Fever. First six, though, were tough, obviously. They weren't as easy. You guys have made the playoffs the last two. What's been the big turnaround? How have you viewed the way the team has grown organically?
And then you bring in Caitlin, who changed the world, changed the dynamic of basketball. And as a friend and as a player, you grow to appreciate her because, you know, certain doors have opened because she's come to the Fever, and you have to respect that. And I love the teammate and person in her because she's accepted it with so much grace and even welcomed us with open arms to, you know, make this thing happen. So I think it just took a lot of big pieces to make, you know, what it is now.
You just heard the voice of a true veteran, Kelsey Mitchell, stating what the world already knows. Caitlin Clark changed everything for the Indiana Fever. But what if I told you the moment that truly secured their future wasn't when Clark was on the court, but when she was forced off it? For weeks, the official story has been one of tragedy. When Caitlin Clark went down with a right groin injury that sidelined her for the postseason, the narrative was sealed. The Fever's miracle run was over. The engine of the team was gone, and with it, their championship hopes. But many of you watching have been connecting the dots, sensing there was a deeper story the media was missing. And you were right, because that injury wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of their real identity. Today, we're going to show you how that devastating injury, combined with a bizarre $200 fine from the league office, didn't break the Indiana Fever. It forged them. It stripped away their dependency on a single superstar and forced the team's true leaders to emerge from the shadows, revealing a power dynamic that is the real blueprint for their dynasty. We are a community of narrative analysts here, and we believe the truth is always found by digging deeper. If you believe that too, show your support and smash that like button. It tells us you want more investigations that filter out the noise and expose the real story. All right, let's set the stage. Because to understand the tectonic shift that happened inside that locker room, you first have to remember the official story that was sold to the world. The narrative was simple, immediate, and brutal. The Indiana Fever's dream season was dead on arrival. Before the injury, the Fever were the single biggest story in sports. Propelled by the supernova that is Caitlin Clark, a franchise that was once an afterthought was now selling out arenas, dominating ratings, and playing with a swagger that had them rocketing through the playoffs. They had advanced to the WNBA semifinals to face the Las Vegas Aces, and the momentum felt unstoppable. Then it happened. The news broke that Clark was sidelined with a right groin injury, officially out for the remainder of the postseason. The media reaction was swift and unanimous. It was a catastrophe. Pundits framed it as a tragic final chapter. The storyline was no longer about a potential championship. It was about what could have been. They painted a picture of a devastated locker room, a team whose heart had been ripped out, left to face a juggernaut in the Aces without their generational leader. On the surface, it made perfect sense. You don't lose a player of Clark's magnitude, the offensive engine, the primary playmaker, the gravitational force that bends the entire game to her will, and simply carry on. The official narrative was one of disaster. But that story, the one fed to the public and repeated on every major sports network, was missing the most critical detail. While the world was mourning the end of the Fever's run, something else was quietly beginning inside the four walls of their locker room. The official story wasn't a lie. It was just a distraction from the truth. While the media was busy writing the Fever's obituary, the first crack in that official narrative appeared, and it didn't come from a press conference or a team statement. It came from a single, defiant social media post that cost Caitlin Clark exactly $200. Now, for our narrative analysts watching, this is where the real story begins. The WNBA, like most professional sports leagues, typically keeps fines under wraps. They are handled internally, but Caitlin Clark chose to break that protocol. Following the Fever's grueling first-round victory over Atlanta, a series defined by intense physicality, she took to X, formerly Twitter, and disclosed the fine herself. Her post read, "Got fined $200 for this LOL. Bench mob will be even more rowdy tomorrow. Let's go." Let's dissect that. This is not the message of a player or a team that feels defeated. The LOL isn't just a casual laugh. It's a dismissal of the league's attempt to police their emotions. The tone is defiant, humorous, and unifying. And the reaction from inside the Fever locker room was the tell. There was no drama, no controversy. Instead, teammates amplified the joke, rallying around her and turning the fine into a badge of honor. This was the first signal that the public story was a complete fabrication. A team supposedly crushed by injury wasn't mourning. They were laughing in the face of the league office. This single, lighthearted moment revealed a powerful undercurrent of unity and defiance that the mainstream narrative completely missed. It was a sign that with Clark sidelined, the team wasn't collapsing, it was consolidating. And it was the perfect environment for a new power dynamic to be forged. To truly understand what happened next, you have to appreciate the sheer size of the void Caitlin Clark left behind. This wasn't just about losing points on a scoreboard. The Fever lost their entire operational center. On the court, Clark was the system, the primary ball handler, the offensive initiator, the player whose gravity dictated every single defensive scheme they faced. But her role off the court was just as massive. She was the focal point of every press conference, the subject of every reporter's question, and the face of the franchise in every national broadcast. Her presence created a kind of media shield for the rest of the roster. They could focus on their roles, while Clark absorbed the immense pressure and spotlight. When she was sidelined, two distinct vacuums were created simultaneously. There was the obvious on-court vacuum. Who would step up to run the offense, make the critical plays, and command the respect of the defense? But more importantly, there was a narrative vacuum. Who would now speak for this team? Who would face the media and define their story in the face of what everyone assumed was a season-ending disaster? A vacuum in any system demands to be filled. In a high-stakes environment like the WNBA playoffs, that demand is absolute. The Fever didn't have a choice. They couldn't wait for their star to return. They were forced to evolve in real time, under the brightest lights, against the highest odds. And what happened next wasn't a fluke. It was the result of that intense pressure, revealing the true character and leadership that had been developing all season long, just waiting for the right moment to be called upon. The question was no longer if someone would step up, but who. The first person to step into that void was the one who had been there all along, the team's veteran backbone, Kelsey Mitchell. Fans and analysts have long described Mitchell as the player who kept the lights on during the Fever's darkest years, the loyal soldier who endured blowout losses and rebuilding seasons while carrying the franchise on her shoulders. But with Clark sidelined, her role underwent a fundamental transformation. She didn't just need to score points, she needed to seize control of the narrative. In her season-end interviews, Mitchell wasn't just answering questions. She was giving a masterclass in leadership. She stepped into the narrative vacuum and began to articulate the team's story with a clarity and authority that no one else could.
Personally, here's where I think they didn't do a very good job, and that was with Kelsey Mitchell, who's an unrestricted free agent, because Kelsey Mitchell had a hell of a season this season, and I don't think she got the credit that she deserved.
Let's break down what you just heard, because it's far more than a simple thank you to the front office. This is a leader defining her team's entire timeline. She honors the organization's painful rebuilding process. She validates the new talent like Aliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark. And then she positions herself as the bridge that connects the two eras. By saying it was a match made in heaven, she wasn't just praising team chemistry, she was authoring their origin story. This was a calculated act. With the team's biggest star silenced by injury, Mitchell understood that the story could easily become one of failure and what-ifs. She stepped in front of the cameras and defined it herself, not as a tragedy, but as the culmination of a long, difficult journey. She became the voice of their resilience, the living memory of their struggle, and the ultimate validator of their success. The narrative vacuum was filled, but while Kelsey Mitchell was mastering the media and controlling the narrative, the on-court vacuum remained. The Fever still needed a focal point, an anchor who could deliver in high-pressure moments and withstand the brutal physicality of the WNBA playoffs. And into that void stepped Aliyah Boston. With Clark out, Boston's role elevated from a rising star to the team's on-court enforcer. During the Fever's intense first-round series win against the Atlanta Dream, a series so physical that coaches like Becky Hammon publicly called it a football match with bodies flying, Boston didn't just survive, she thrived. She became the team's center of gravity in the paint, delivering the key late-game plays that sealed their advance to the semifinals. This wasn't just about scoring points, this was about presence. In the moments where Caitlin Clark would normally have the ball in her hands, it was Boston who demanded it. She became the physical embodiment of the team's newfound resilience. While Mitchell was their voice, Boston was their spine, providing the steel and the stability they needed to weather the storm. She proved that the Fever's toughness wasn't dependent on one player, but was a core part of their collective DNA. This level of physicality has been a major talking point all season. What do you think? Is the league letting things get out of hand, or is this just tough playoff basketball? Let us know your take in the comments. With Boston anchoring the court and Mitchell commanding the narrative, the new power dynamic was complete. The leadership vacuum hadn't just been filled, it had been upgraded. Now let's connect the dots, because this is the story the mainstream media completely failed to report. They saw an injury and reported a tragedy. But for the narrative analysts watching, the evidence points to a much different conclusion. This wasn't a collapse. It was a transformation forged in the fires of playoff pressure. Think about the dynamic. Before the injury, the Indiana Fever's identity was singular. They were Caitlin Clark's team. Everything revolved around her. But her absence shattered that model and forced them to build something new, something stronger, from the ground up. Kelsey Mitchell stepped into the narrative vacuum and gave the team its voice, its history, and its soul. Aliyah Boston stepped into the on-court vacuum and gave the team its steel, its anchor, and its clutch gene. These were not separate or isolated events. They were two halves of a whole, a new leadership core crystallizing in real time. The adversity didn't expose their weakness, it revealed their hidden strengths. It forced them to become a more complete, more dangerous, and more resilient unit. They learned they could absorb the hardest hit imaginable, losing a generational talent, and not just survive, but fight back with a newfound ferocity. This wasn't a setback. It was an evolution. The injury didn't derail their season. It accelerated their growth, forcing them to become the team they were always meant to be, just far sooner than anyone, including themselves, ever expected. And this brings us to the final and most crucial dot to connect, the dynasty blueprint. For months, the idea of the Fever's Fab Four, Mitchell, Orf, Clark, Boston, and Hull, becoming a dynasty has been a popular theory. Now, we're getting into rumor territory here, but multiple reports have suggested that Kelsey Mitchell might even be willing to take a pay cut to keep that core intact. Before Clark's injury, that was just a hopeful idea, a blueprint on paper. But after, it became a proven concept. By winning in the playoffs without their superstar, the Fever front office, and more importantly, the players themselves, received the ultimate validation. They now know they have the right pieces. They have a battle-tested leadership core and a resilient identity that can withstand anything. The crisis didn't just solidify their chemistry, it solidified their belief in the entire championship project. So, when we filter out the noise, the truth becomes clear. Caitlin Clark's injury wasn't the tragic end to a Cinderella story. It was the single most important catalyst in the Indiana Fever's evolution from a promising young team into a legitimate, multifaceted championship contender, it forced the emergence of Kelsey Mitchell as the team's narrative soul and Aliyah Boston as its physical spine, forging a tough, resilient identity that is the true foundation of the dynasty they are now poised to build. So, what's your take on all of this? Was Clark's injury a tragic setback that cost them a real shot at the title this year, or was it the blessing in disguise that will make them champions in the future? Let us know your verdict in the comments below. We are going to be tracking the development of this Fever dynasty all through the offseason and into next year. To make sure you don't miss the next chapter in this story, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. And finally, if you know another fan who loves the story behind the story, share this video with them. Every narrative analyst deserves to be part of the real conversation.